Hi everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today is Valentine's Day, but this episode is not about romance only. This episode is really all inclusive. So it's for single people, it's for partnered people, it's for people who are in complicated relationships, and it's for people who are healing from past relationships. Today we are speaking carefully about how we have been taught to recognize love and how that teaching often confuses attachment with intensity and dependence with care. So with Valentine's Day being present, I want to be clear about something up front. Valentine's Day is the entry point for this conversation, but it is not the destination, okay? So this episode isn't about telling you when or if you're ready to love. It's not about teaching you how to love or even who to love, right? It's about slowing down and about asking better questions on what we actually call love, right? What love feels like in our bodies and what love actually requires of us. So let's talk about it. All right, y'all, so let's get into it. So what do we mean when we say love? I wanted to start off with this question, right? What do we mean when we say love? And how do we know the difference between love, attachments, needs, and familiarity? Now, this question, it matters a lot more than we think. Because many of us aren't actually choosing love. We're choosing what feels familiar, or what feels intense, or what feels easier than before, or what feels reassuring and validating in the moment. Sometimes what we call love is really just compatibility, right? Sometimes it's a shared history or a shared experience, and sometimes it's just having emotional closeness. And sometimes it's simply that we just have somebody who feels recognizable and really gets us, right? And familiarity, that can feel a lot like safety, even when it isn't. And so I ask this question, what do we mean when we say love? Not to make anyone defensive or to question their choices, right? I'm not trying to confuse, but I'm really just trying to invite some reflection, because reflection is what creates space, and space is what allows us to be honest without shame. Now, I'm a social worker, so from a clinical lens, I see a lot of people who often struggle, not because they don't want love. In fact, they actually want love very badly, but they struggle because they've never been taught how to differentiate love from attachment or need. And that's when they run into a lot of problems. So I want to talk a little bit more about that in the next segment. All right, so in this segment, I want to talk about love as not being a single experience, right? One of the most important things to understand is this. Love is not a single grand gesture. Love doesn't just drop out of the sky and land in front of you, right? It's not a feeling that you just fall into and then stay there forever. Love is actually a choice, and it's a daily and active choice. It's a muscle that has to be built over time. And we use this word love for many things, right? But not everything that we call love really feels the same in our body. So think about it. I want to introduce the idea that there are different types of love, not just listing them out, but really naming them as lived experiences, right? Experiences that people already recognize. All right, so number one, romantic love, right? Especially the kind that we see around Valentine's Day, and it often comes in symbols, wrapped in pretty boxes. Candy, cards, flowers, gifts, affection. And there is nothing wrong with any of those things, but romantic love is only one expression of love and not the definition of it. Number two, There's familial love, right? And that's the kind of love that feels like a soft landing, the kind that shows up in down-home cooking or in quiet caregiving or intergenerational connection. And when I think of familial love, the first thing that comes to my mind is my grandmother's love and how I always felt like when I was around her that I was loved. So familial love is the kind of love that says, I've known you long enough and I see you clearly, right? Number 3, there's platonic love, and that's the girl, I love you, or that's my homie, that's what's up. That's the kind of love that lets you breathe and exhale, the kind where you don't have to perform or explain, right? The kind of love that makes you feel relaxed and seen because you're with your people, right? And they get you. They get you automatically. And number 4, there's, I think, probably the most important, self-love, right? And I'm not talking about the watered-down version that gets marketed to us. No, not just lighting candles, running bubble baths, and lo-fi playlists, right? But the self-love as actualization, self-actualization, having the ability to meet your own needs and the willingness to build a meaningful life that doesn't depend on external validation. And from a clinical perspective, we also talk about things like secure attachment versus anxious attachment, right? And secure attachment, that's really grounded in trust and emotional stability. And anxious attachment, that shows up often as insecurity, controlling behavior, hypervigilance, people-pleasing, or constantly needing reassurance. And here's the key point, guys. Anxious attachment can feel very intense, right? It can feel like that crazy in love feeling. You know, we can take on the world, the honeymoon phase, but crazy in love is temporary. And scientifically, that crazy in love feeling is really about the dopamine and serotonin in our brains, right? The chemicals that tell us to feel certain ways. But those hormones, right, eventually they start to phase out and they start to level out about a year or two when the brain starts to even itself out again. And even when that happens, you know, sometimes that intense high that can be replaced by something more healthy, but having that intensity is not the same as having real love and intimacy. And when that intensity fades, that's when compatibility comes into play. And if compatibility fails after the high wears off, that's when we can run into problems with sustaining long-term relationships. So I want to talk a little bit more about love languages and emotional needs in the next segment. All right, so love languages are not emotional needs. And this is where I may start to sound a little more clinical, right? Love languages describe how care is expressed. Attachment describes how safety is regulated. And dependency describes how stability is outsourced. And those are not all the same things. So if my love language is quality time, that doesn't mean that I need constant access to you. And if your love language is words of affirmation, that does not mean you need nonstop reassurance. See, what often happens is that unmet attachment needs get mislabeled as love languages. And then people feel confused or frustrated when those needs aren't met in the ways that they expect. And so from my work, I often see couples arguing about very surface level behaviors when the deeper issue is actually not about love. It's about emotional safety. And this is where people get stuck. Not because they don't love, not because they don't care, but because they're speaking in different emotional languages. And that is a huge reframe, right? And I also want to talk a little bit about independence, interdependence, and codependence, right? Because this is the part where I now want to slow down for, because I'm hoping that it will land deeply for everyone. There are people who need space to feel safe. And there are people who need closeness to feel safe. And there are people who may need a combination of both. And neither is wrong. But mismatches can create tension when there is no awareness. So independence means I can function and I can self-regulate on my own. Interdependence means we can rely on each other without losing ourselves. And we don't have to rely on each other to function. Codependence, on the other hand, means my stability and my self-regulation purely depends on your behavior. And there is a big difference between relying on someone and depending on them. Reliance is a mutual and voluntary trust. It's an agreement between both parties that someone will perform as expected. Whereas reliance is more of a one-sided thing, and it implies that one person is holding quiet expectations of the other out of a lack or out of a need or out of fear, right? So love is not earned by proximity, right? It's not earned by just being close to someone, and it's not determined by having constant access. And you can't prove love by making sacrifices. This is where Valentine's Day pressure, it often reinforces certain myths, right? Myths of constant togetherness, which is proximity. Myths of grand gestures, which is access. And then myths of if they loved me, they would do this, that, or the third, right? Sacrifices. But love is not measured by any of those things. It's not measured by how much you give up. It's measured by how well you remain whole while doing it. So in the next segment, I want to talk about what Valentine's Day really reveals. All right, so what does Valentine's Day really reveal, right? I want to offer you now an alternative narrative to this story. Instead of saying Valentine's Day is about love, I want to offer you this. Valentine's Day is about what we believe love should look like. Why? Because it shows us a few things. It shows us, one, who feels affirmed. Two, who feels invisible. Three, who feels pressured. And four, who feels relieved when it's all over. And those reactions, they're information, right? Not just judgments. They tell us where our core beliefs about love are really coming from and whether those beliefs are actually still serving us. So redefining love on your own terms, from a clinical lens, love is not about fear, it's not control, it's not obligation, and it's not constant reassurance. Love allows room for growth. Love respects boundaries. And love supports autonomy. And what I often see in my work is that people don't need more effort. They need more clarity. So, as you move through this Valentine's adjacent season, I will leave you with this invitation. What if love is not something that you have to chase or prove? What if it's not something that you need to go after? What if it's something that you invite into your life by applying it with intention? Redefining love doesn't mean that you have to lose connection, but it does mean that you have to gain honesty and clarity. So, I want to thank you all again for being here, and as always, thank you for speaking carefully with me. Until next time, bye now.